Yo, how's it going? This week, I want to see if my iPhone 12 Pro Max can look like my Panasonic S1. This is a mirrorless camera, all the rage these days. I like it, got some good looking stuff out of there. This is the new iPhone, which is also all the rage these days. Not to flex with my monthly payments or anything. That's dumb.
Not to flex, but like I couldn't pay it all off in one thing.
I mean, anyways, I want to see how well this can look, but in order to show you both, I'm filming with my old Canon camera, so let's go ahead and switch over back to my Panasonic S1. There we go. Now let's get to talking about this. But first, I left my closet open. Let me fix that. I was definitely looking at the monitor there. That's hard not to do. So now let's talk about this iPhone. You know, obviously smaller, it's gonna have a smaller sensor, so you're not gonna have the same like depth of field and everything. But I think the biggest thing that makes it hard to make iPhone footage look like camera footage is just the auto exposure and the auto white balance. Because whenever you pan with a phone, I feel like the dead giveaway to me when I see like test footage and stuff. It's so obvious when there's that auto adjustment and it just gives it that phone feel. I think there's more to it than that too. Like, I mean, I feel like you can kind of tell when it's a smaller sensor a little bit. But either way, I think the biggest thing is the auto stuff. So what I've done and what a bunch of people have done is I'm using this app called Filmic Pro, and it lets you control everything manually. So you know, I can lock in that exposure and that white balance, and so that already, like looking at my footage that I've messed around with that, it just looks so much more like an SLR camera or something. And so that's cool. The other thing that's cool about this app is that I can use a log profile with it. And so what that allows me to do, I mean, it's a log profile, so it gives you more dynamic range. You get more detail in your highlights and more detail in your shadows. So when you're color grading, you have more to work with. So what that's gonna allow me to do is hopefully not have to do as drastically different color grades to my camera and my phone to make them look the same. Hopefully I can like have a general color grade on an adjustment layer and then just kind of drop down and make small adjustments to match them. But what this is going to be cool for is, I mean, this is always in my pocket. So, you know, if I ever want to film something out in public, I don't want to have my whole camera, which is true for me. I can just pull this out and hopefully I can make it at least comparable. I mean, even if it's not, I can still film on my phone. Who really cares? As long as I get like good composition and good lighting, and I am a cinematographer and I'm really getting into it. Just... Anyways, gonna test that out. I think it's supposed to be raining. So yeah, let's go test it, baby. So that was kind of rough. It was super rainy, and that was a perfect example of when I would probably use my phone. It definitely didn't quite stand up to my camera, and I'm gonna go over some reasons why. First off though, is just like using it in general. A lot of the reasons you would use a camera, other than it just looking better, is just the ergonomics of it. You know, you have focus wheels, you have your aperture wheel, you have your ISO wheel, you got everything that you could need. The first thing is that there's no aperture control in the phone, and that just takes out a whole section of the things that you can do to change your exposure on your camera. So whereas on my camera, I can choose if I want to sacrifice my shutter speed or my aperture once I get to that lowest ISO to get rid of some light. With the phone, you can only choose your shutter speed. And I personally typically like to sacrifice that aperture. And I know you can get NDs, and I wish that I had some, but I'm too poor. / it's not a fun thing to buy when you have the money. You want to buy like a cool lens or something. The other thing though that is kind of a bonus for the phone, out in the rain I felt a lot more comfortable using my phone, whereas my camera, I was worried about stuff getting on the lens that I just bought, and there's so much to worry about, you know, changing lenses. On the phone, it's just pressing a button, whereas on the camera, it's physically switching a lens, and you don't want to get raindrops on your sensor, so I feel like I couldn't do that out in the rain. That being said though, the issue with the phone is that each lens is actually a whole different camera, so you don't have the same look necessarily across all of them. Like the wide angle lens is a lot more noisy, so like I would never even try that in the low light. The last thing that was kind of rough with the iPhone is that I have a PC, so I couldn't AirDrop or anything. So transferring the clips was actually kind of a nightmare. I had to like try to upload them to my Creative Cloud, which wasn't working. I had to try to keep the phone awake. It just kind of sucked. So now let's go into actually checking out the clips in post. Right off the bat, when I dropped the footage into the timeline, I noticed that my iPhone's log profile had way more contrast. Because of that, there's a lot less detail in the highlights and the shadows. So when I overexposed, which I did because I was trying to keep that shutter speed at that twice the frame rate, it totally was overexposed and I wasn't able to really bring those highlights back. So the first clip I tried to do stuff with, there wasn't really much I could do. The first thing I tried to do was just doing an adjustment layer with my S1 and just doing the color grade for that on the adjustment layer. And then I had the iPhone footage under the same adjustment layer. And let's just say it didn't quite work. It was very overexposed and way too saturated and contrasty. It was crazy. So the next thing I tried to make some adjustments on the clip of the iPhone footage to see if it would still fit under that adjustment layer at all. And it kind of worked, but not really. There still wasn't much detail. I was able to make it look like a normal footage, but it didn't look great. Once I did a color grade just on the phone footage, it looked okay, but again, I overexposed, and the log profile on the phone really doesn't keep that detail in the highlights like it does with a more professional full frame camera. So when I tried to bring it down, everything just kind of looked flat, and it kind of just felt like I was taking the opacity down because it was just white. There wasn't really anything there for me to kind of bring back down. After I finished playing around with that clip, I tried another clip that I didn't overexpose because I upped the frame rate. That being said, the movement in the clip didn't look quite as nice as it would have if I was able to keep the shutter speed. So with this one, I tried the same thing where I just did the color grade on the S1 footage and tried to put the iPhone footage under the same adjustment layer. And again, it totally didn't work. I didn't really expect this to work. I just thought it'd be a fun test. But the difference with this one that was properly exposed is it actually did okay with some adjustments. All I had to do was bring down the exposure and the contrast and add some more of that orange into the midtones. And it actually looked like kind of the same as the S1 footage as far as color palette. Obviously, still doesn't look as good, but it did okay. The last one I tried was indoors with some artificial lighting. I was trying to get some B-roll of both my camera and my phone just to have for the video, but it actually ended up working really well as a test. The issue with this one is I think the biggest weakness of shooting with a small sensor is the low light's never going to be as good. This full frame sensor, it's got bigger pixels, so obviously it's going to let in more light. But with the phone, in the low light, there's just a lot of noise. It's really bad with the ultra wide, which I didn't even try because I already knew it was really bad. But even with the regular lens and the telephoto, it still looked pretty noisy. It's also a lot more sharp than my camera, but in a bad way. It feels like it's like taking the sharpness adjuster in a color grading software and just bumping it up. It doesn't feel like natural sharpness from the optics or anything. It feels like soft optics, but then just sharpness in the color grade shot way up on its own. That's might be something I can adjust. I haven't really looked for that, but definitely something I noticed, especially in this low light situation. And in the low light, the shutter speed, I had it at the right shutter speed, but the movement just gave this weird artifacting that just looked wrong. So once I put it into the timeline, again, obviously the adjustment layer thing didn't work. But the issue with this one, it was kind of hard to make it look usable at all. This one had the opposite issue from the first one in that it was really underexposed. And I think that with this log profile, it does an even worse job of keeping the detail in the shadows than it does the highlights. I was trying to bring it up so that you could see into the shadow a little bit on my camera, but I couldn't get any, that was completely blacked out in front of the camera. And overall on this one, the footage was just too dark to really do a good color grade on. Most of the detail was just kind of gone, and the detail I was able to get just looked super grainy and weird. In general though, the footage from this one was just too dark to really even get to look usable. It just goes to show that you need to expose your shots properly. But that being said, it's nice to be able to kind of have that flexibility of fixing it if you do make a mistake. And with the phone, you really don't have that. In conclusion, the iPhone is great to use in situations where it's not practical to use your camera, like it's too rainy, it's too wet. Then again, this camera does have weather sealing, so I should probably just man up and use it. But, I don't really want to bring my camera up on the mountain when I'm snowboarding, or I'm not always going to have it with me. Maybe I just want to get a quick clip of something cool I see. And I think in those situations, the iPhone does good enough. Although it doesn't have all the features that a pro mirrorless camera like the S1 would have, like an aperture control or a good log profile that's really going to give you some real dynamic range, it is a lot better than most phone footage, and I'd feel comfortable using it for quick stuff that I'm just going to put in my videos. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think the log profile in the Filmic Pro app I use isn't really worth it because it doesn't really give you any more flexibility in the color grade, in my opinion, than just a regular profile. So I think next time I'll just stick with the Dolby Vision thing. I think that honestly will just look a lot better because you can kind of see what it's going to look like when you're shooting and make those adjustments that you need to make there rather than not really being able to tell if it's actually overexposed or if it just looks like it because of the contrast being so low. When exposed properly, the footage actually looks really great, and I think using a normal color profile will actually make it a lot easier to make sure that it is exposed properly. I know I could get some ND filters so that I could keep that shutter speed where I want it, but I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of having the convenience of a phone. Having to screw on an ND filter there, it doesn't really make sense to me. And honestly, I think that's okay. The fast shutter speed isn't a huge deal when you're already dealing with footage that isn't going to look as good anyways. Overall, the phone looks really good in a pinch, but I wouldn't replace my camera with it. Anyways, that's what I found this week. You may disagree or agree with me. It's my first time doing a video like this. I'm having fun. I'm rocking out. I'm chilling out. I'm getting clout. I'm not. This is shit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I make another video, which will hopefully be next week, but this one's probably gonna be late because I'm a little bitch boy who can't get shit done.